Started. Good evening, everyone. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded. I also do want to remind you to kindly mute, and the breakout rooms will not be live streamed, but the recording for the breakout rooms will be uploaded within the next 24 hours, and you can access it on the board page. Again, I do want to welcome everybody to the Southeast Guiding Coalition meeting for November the 18th. This meeting, of course, is a continuation of our ongoing discussions regarding phase two for the charge focused on enrollment and program balancing in Southeast Portland. I am Esther Mogbenyi, Regional Superintendent Elementary Schools, and I have my colleague here, Margaret Calvert, as well. I am glad to have her support. Welcome to members of our Board of Directors. A special welcome to Board Chair DePass. I also want to welcome Flow Analytics, Corinne and Brick Architectural Firm, our principals, and the Southeast Guiding Coalition members. On November 4th, the PPS team shared the updated grad drills. With the support of Flow Analytics, we continued discussions of the two proposals, namely Proposal A and Proposal B, and started identifying possible drivers for Proposal C. Tonight, we will revisit the two proposals with the intention of continuing to identify the drivers for the third scenario or proposal. We also have the opportunity to hear from Chair DePass, followed by a question and answer session. Our co-chairs, Beth Kavanaugh and Adriel Person, will also report out on what they're hearing from our communities. We will then continue to identify and establish drivers for Proposal C. What we have heard from Proposal A and Proposal B, and what you'd like to actually see combined in Proposal C. Finally, we will focus on neighborhood schools tonight. The proposed community meetings will begin on December 6th. I believe the Community Engagement Office, headed by Shanice, have shared flyers that give more details about these meetings. I want to acknowledge that the PPS process of enrollment and program balancing is steeped in emotion and sometimes raw passion. That is well understood. However, that said, we would like to ask that you politely restrain and refrain from behaviors that will keep others from being or feeling free to participate. Exercise some self-control so that we can benefit from shared perspectives without inadvertently or deliberately silencing voices. In addition to hearing from our communities, we would like to hear from our BIPOC families and communities who are impacted or significantly impacted in this process. Please be mindful of word choice and comments. If there are comments that have to be stated but can be perceived as threatening, please alert us via text or email so we can reach out to you to listen to what you have to say. Megan, Judy, Claire, and I are very interested in hearing all voices. Finally, please remember that we may not all get what we want. However, we can negotiate and compromise and propose trade-offs that will advance us towards our desired goals. If we keep our students at the core of our plans and proposals, I am certain we as a collective body will be in a better place at the end of this process than when we started. Please remember, we'll also have community feedback events on December 6th. Next slide, please. I do want to also acknowledge our Native American families and communities by reading the Land Acknowledgement and Anti-Oppression Statement. At PPS, we strive to strengthen our relationships with the Native community and Native nations. A symbol of this commitment is the Land Acknowledgement. These statements bring visibility to the first peoples of our collective home. This statement is meant to provide information and context while also encouraging all of us to reflect on our current day relationship with Native people and Native experiences. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of the Chinook, Clackamas, Kalapuya, Multnomah, Wasco, Cathlamet, Tualatin, and Malala. We also know that many other tribes made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We honor their history and acknowledge the sacrifices they made. Let us also acknowledge the robust present-day federally recognized tribes of this area, the Grand Ronde, the Siletz, and the Cowlitz. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the Chinook Nation, who has been seeking federal recognition for many years. The urban Indian community is made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country, representing 400 tribes. The urban Indian community has a vivid history made up of people whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking more opportunities. Next slide, please. Today, these tribes and communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that would be greatly admired by their ancestors. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve students and families representing more than 115 different tribal nations within our education system. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization on our students, all students today, and make visible the multitude of Native families and many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. We encourage every person to reflect on their own history, understand the history of colonization and genocide, and support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. This acknowledgement is one step that we can take to improve our support of Indigenous communities in the area. In addition to acknowledging the land and those that have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa, whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can begin to heal. Next slide, please. Tonight, we will have a board update. Then we'll look at drivers for draft proposal C. We'll also review draft proposal A and B and discuss what we've heard. And then we'll participate in some engagement planning for future meetings. Next slide, please. That said, I do want to turn over the presentation to Karina Ruiz.
Thank you, Dr. O. Welcome, everyone. We always start our meetings with an acknowledgement that we want to honor the group agreements we made to each other, to stay engaged, to speak our truth responsibly, to listen, to understand, and to believe, to be willing to do things differently and experience discomfort, expect and accept non-closure, and the ones that we added last time to ensure that we are taking space and making space. The facilitators will be sure to engage with you all in the small groups to ensure that we are doing that, and that ensure that we've got kind of a cycle of everyone in the room getting a chance to speak when we are in those sessions, and that we respect each other's voices and views. So in addition to any of those, is there any feedback tonight or any addition to the group agreements moving forward that, that you need to feel safe and brave to share this evening? Just put it in the chat or just open up your mic and let us know if there's anything you need tonight. Okay. Not seeing anything. We're going to move to the check-in. So as Dr. O said, remember that we will not, that the audience, the public won't be able to listen live to the breakout rooms, but we will get those sessions recorded and ensure that they're available on the district's website by tomorrow afternoon. So tonight, what we want to do as we check in with one another, we will be taken into our breakout rooms to really just get to know one another at a more sort of individual basis. So share with one another your name, your connection to the district, or what school you're connected with. And then given the season, take a moment to talk about what is one thing that you are grateful for. So it's a good opportunity for us to do that. We will have about 10 minutes. So that means we've got plus or minus 2.5 minutes per person. 2 to 3 minutes per person to do that, and maybe do that alphabetically so we don't have to have the awkward who goes first alphabetically by first name. So I believe Marnie or Nathan, you're gonna push.
I have made them, but I made you gave you duos, so I'm just going to give you 6 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
And any of you who have joined since I made these, I'll just place you as we go. So have fun.
Yeah, Shanice.
Is back, right? So we are all, thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. All right, Claire, will you lead us in this conversation, please?
Yes, you bet. Good evening, everyone. I just want to, first of all, welcome. We have two board members with us tonight, Julia Brem-Edwards, Director Brem-Edwards, and Chair Michelle DePass. So Michelle will be joining me in this conversation on this slide. But I want to start out by going over a couple of things. So these are the 4 questions that we asked the board, and just I want to give a little bit of context, and especially in 2 of them. When we talked about question number 3, which is implementing in fall 2023, I want to share some little background to that with the Southeast Guiding Coalition members. As you know, across the country, there's a labor shortage. I think we see that at the grocery store, at the gas station, in our classrooms with not enough teachers. It's everywhere. And this fall, we had an unusual set of circumstances where we were still hiring 130 to 150 teaching positions. And so what that has meant is that a lot of other people that have teaching licenses that normally are doing other work are in the classroom teaching kids, which is obviously our mission and our core service that we provide to our students. And so, but what that means is that we're having difficulties filling all of our positions this year. And when we move into, it means that things like curriculum and professional development for teachers, those kinds of things are being put on hold because the people that normally do that work are actually teaching in the classroom. And our central administrators that support principals are teaching in classrooms, and some of them are being principals. So there's a lot of people covering for others and not enough people in the system. So when we hire new teachers every spring, we really have a goal of getting out early to our external applicants, especially as they're graduating from college, and getting new teachers into our district. With the Southeast Guiding Coalition work, there are many changes where we'll have to work internally to move staff around from school to school, as in boundaries change, as programs move. And so with that, we have to finish that work first, and then we go to external, and we work with our human resources department leadership and our teachers bargaining unit work together and implement language to do that. That takes a significant amount of time and would delay the job postings to the external candidates. And what we're concerned with the labor shortage is that we would not be able to hire our teachers for the fall, and that it would be an impact district-wide, similar to what we had this year, or could even be worse. With this, normally we'd post between March and April for externally, and this process would delay that posting until June. And so that's why we are, as a staff, are recommending that an implementation moves to fall of 2023 due to the labor shortage across the country and the need to have teachers in all of our classrooms. So the second thing that I wanted to share with you is, I think when I was discussing with the board about creative science, I didn't go into detail of the trade-offs between the neighborhood schools and the creative science when we blend two schools together. And so that's something that we'll work to share more information with the board so they understand that means that some neighborhood families are having to move out of a school to make room for the creative science students to move in. And the other piece is that there is creative science being a lottery program, that with each year we would be increasing the number of neighborhood students, the percentage from when we first blend them together to making it so there's fewer and fewer lottery positions and more neighborhood students, so that over time we would have a similar 75% from the neighborhood and 25% from lottery from the two programs. So I wanted to share both of those with you a little bit more in depth because I did share some of that with the board and I thought it would be helpful for you to hear it tonight as well. And then I also will ask Chair DePass now to go ahead and help us with what she heard from her board members on Tuesday night when they were responding to these 4 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Hertz. So on Tuesday, the board had an opportunity to hear from Deputy Superintendent Hertz and an update on the 2 proposal scenarios that were brought at that time. As part of that discussion, we were asked to respond to 4 questions, and we did a popcorn style that included some questions from board members as we're socializing these concepts. So the first question was whether or not the board supported a whole school model dual language immersion, or was there a preference to leave things the way they were? That was the first question. The second was whether or not creative science should remain a K-8 or should it change to a K-5? The third question was whether or not we should complete phase 2 of the process by this February, but to delay implementation until 2023. And then finally, we were asked if we should consider pausing the process at all, considering the demands on staff, you know, whether or not we're fully hearing from community members. And so that was the question 4. And on the first question, we had an opportunity to hear from Dr. Cheryl Proctor, who didn't go into detail, but presented the data and she shared that with the board why the whole school DLI model is considered best practice. It had to do with distribution of resources throughout a school building. And there was generally support from members to move away from single strand, understanding that for some schools like Harrison Park and Kelly, those might be anomalies to the process. So in general, what I heard on Tuesday was the board is generally supportive of question number 1 of moving to a whole school model with some caveats, particularly around Kelly and creative science. The second question was around whether or not creative science should be a K-8 or K-5. And yes, we do understand that generally there is a demand, some demand for a smaller middle school experience. And so most of the board shares that they could support creative science as a K-8. Questions 3 and 4 regarding the completion of phase 3 and delaying the implementation. Again, people generally said, yes, we should probably delay implementation, complete the project in 22 and delay implementation. Consider what you just heard from Deputy Hertz about staffing shortages, and that's not just in our industry and education, that's in, of the 4 errands I ran in between about around 5 to 6 tonight, I stopped at the UPS station where I heard there was a labor shortage and shipping and airlines and cargo. Second, was a pharmacy. I then stopped at a restaurant, and at each stop I made, and a gas station too. So at each of those stops, I heard about the labor shortages one way or the other, or experienced them actually in real time. On the fourth question was whether we should pause the Southeast Guiding Coalition, which we gave serious consideration, considering the demands on staff right now, and again the demands on staff. And there was a strong desire to continue, not to pause the process, but to delay the implementation. We understand the complexities and the timelines associated with the staffing issues, and there was a lot of support shared with the idea of postponing the implementation of the final scenario if it would help to ensure more successful staffing model at all schools district-wide. And there was also support voiced to not pause and then continue with the process. A couple of the board members wanted additional information, and they're being brought along slowly. This is a lot of information to digest as a new board member, but that's what I heard. And I'm really grateful for all of you here in the process being so engaged and so respectfully engaged. And that's what I have to share tonight.
Thank you, Chair DePass. Next slide, please.
Deputy Superintendent Hertz, before you move on, can I just make a comment about our discussion, if that's all right?
Sure. Did you want to come on? I don't know if you're in a position to come on.
Apparently I'm not. I just tried.
Okay.
So sorry. But I'm not in the grocery store and I'm not driving, so it's safe. It's just the video feed's not good. I think I wanted to comment on, and it's more additive to Chair DePass's summary regarding the question about Creative Science School, whether it's a K-5 or K-8, and I think that the way the question was framed didn't allow for a fuller discussion. And I've certainly heard from people since the meeting about the impacts on Arleta and Woodstock. And so again, not a criticism, but just a comment that that wasn't a topic that the board was asked about. It was more in isolation about just what do you think about this, but not what do you think about this, and if it potentially had an impact. And I think that needs to be explored further, because the narrowness of the question with no bad intent, though, didn't also, I think, allow us to explore potential impacts on other school communities. So I just want to just put that note there. It wasn't like, yes, we made there was a consensus around X, and we knew that it would have this impact. It was, do we have, an initial thought about conceptually about whether it's a K-5 or K-8. So I just want to, I guess, put that into the discussion that to me, that was a piece that would either require further board discussion or, more feedback and discussion by this coalition.
And I concur with that too. I heard Claire say earlier that there wasn't a mention necessarily of the trade-offs, and I also personally would be interested in knowing. It's literally the way the question was written. We didn't have a chance to learn more about what those trade-offs would be with Woodstock and Arleta. So I think there's also desire on behalf of the board to understand what those trade-offs are before we take action one way or the other.
So we certainly have another opportunity on December 14th. We're coming back to the board after our community engagement, so we can certainly have that conversation with the board at that time. The other thing I want to highlight is with Creative Science that we would really work together to support the new partnership between the neighborhood school and the Creative Science program, including how we're implementing the boundary change, and then also the making lottery priorities for the neighborhood students. So really looking at what we can do to make it as least impactful as possible. So I think with that, we were opening it up to a Q&A. I'm just seeing if there was anything in the chat, or if there's someone that wants to unmic just to ask for any clarification about the board meeting.
Hi, yeah, I had raised my hand. Is it okay if I go ahead, Claire?
Sure, I can't see hands for some reason.
Okay, go ahead, Marissa. I see you.
Okay, I'm Marissa Bryman. I'm a parent representative from Harrison Park School. Thank you so much to the board members for being here tonight. And I did watch the meeting, and also I did make a comment at the meeting if you saw that. But I just I appreciate your explanation, Claire, because I think I just felt kind of blindsided by this just sort of like taking it as a given that it's no longer possible to move forward with implementation this year, because I felt like that hadn't really been, we hadn't, and the SEGC really been told that was just kind of a fact now yet. So I understand that. I mean, I really do. I work in healthcare, but I feel like we need like the Harrison Park community. I've heard from a lot of parents that from the beginning, people were sort of hesitant to get involved with this because there was not a lot of faith that it would ever end up really with an outcome that people felt benefited our school, improved our school, or that was equitable. And I feel like we really need, and now it's like we still move forward with opening Kellogg during a pandemic, but now we can't move forward with this. And I think we really need to hear like a commitment that it is going to happen, and it's not just going to be put off another year or like scrapped next year. And I don't know how that can happen, you know, with certainty, but I think that would really go a long way.
I hear the concern. Thank you for bringing it up.
Does anyone else have any questions for Claire relative to the board discussion? Again, you can either put, oh, I see a comment in the chat about, and this I think relative to what we just heard from Marissa, and that additional resources will be committed to providing an equitable middle school experience for middle grade students at Harrison Park. Any?
So we do have bond dollars to put into making sure that the school first was built as a middle school, but making sure that it has the current middle school needs in the school and in terms of a facility. And so we can invite facility folks to share more with that in the process so that you guys have more information on that. But it is in progress. And so know that that is being worked on as well.
Andy, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I mostly just wanted to say thanks for thanks to Director Brim Edwards and to Claire and Chair DePass for acknowledging that point about sort of looking more closely at the impact on neighborhood programs from the CSS relocation, since that's something, I mean, I personally have raised it at a couple meetings, but I know others have too. I guess my one follow-up on that was to better understand that, does that mean we're going to be getting a look at what it could potentially look like as a K-5 instead of a K-8, so we can compare those impacts? Because it seems like that's sort of what we need to make that assessment.
You'll see in later slides that in proposal C, we'll be bringing forward creative science as a K-8, and then we'll have a supplemental information to show what would happen if it was a K-5. So that's coming in a future slide this evening, but it is that's something that we're bringing forward so for a reference point, the Guiding Coalition can see the impact and what it does.
Josh, I see your hand up.
And get all my buttons clicked. Yeah, I'm kind of curious with, you know, the idea of CSS becoming the drive to make it a K-5 and what that is really based in. Because the feedback from, hey, we're not going to get a middle school if we go into one of these, we've already said is not correct, because you can opt out at any point and go to whatever middle school you need. Really want to embrace, you know, any community. And it feels like this has been kind of billed as CSS taken over a little more than boundary changes have freed up space where CSS could fit. Instead, it's CSS is coming in, and it's kind of pitting schools against schools, and it's getting a little frustrating. So that's what I have.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you for those comments. And I do see also criteria used to identify a location for CSS. And I think we have more information about CSS later in the slides, but certainly there's only so many schools that have the capacity to do it in the Southeast region.
Yeah, and I think there will be more information about that. Alyssa, you have your hand up. as you're navigating your house to get to quiet.
Yes, I know. For all the people that have ever had children, it's probably a lot of people on this call. I just had a screaming 9-year-old. I was like, there's no ball down here. I too have a question regarding creative sciences, not to beat a dead horse. One clarification I'd like from, I watched the board meeting, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which board director made this comment. It was a little bit off the cuff about a high percentage of creative science students needing special education services. And that was, first of all, I'm not exactly sure how accurate that is or what that meant. And I guess that seems like a very important consideration when we talk about a school that's currently all lottery and changing it to draw primarily from a neighborhood catchment area. As far as equity goes to those families who, if that is in fact true, do you see what I'm saying? We haven't really explored that as part of this committee. So if it is true, I thought it might be nice to kind of understand like what those considerations might be too. Thank you.
So there are there are some families that select a focus option school that have special education students that look for a smaller, we hear comments from families about having a smaller middle school experience, especially for that aligns better to their student needs. And so we do have some data on special education. If you look at overall, it's very similar to some of the neighborhoods schools, but when you look at this current years, there's a higher percentage at the middle school entry level. And so, so it has, I would say it has increased over time, but it's not, it's really based on families selecting that as an option that is more suitable for their special education child. And that's what that board policy on educational options is all about, is giving families choice about what's the best program that suits their child's needs. And then Josh, I do see your question about the DLI. We do talk about single strand neighborhood schools and how they're impacted. And that is exactly what we're talking about, is that when a DLI program is very successful and then there's only there's only enough students left for one classroom in the neighborhood program, that it has been detrimental to the program, and has the same issue with a single strand DLI, where you don't have, I think Chief Proctor spoke about really much more eloquently than I can about how single strands are not as effective in terms of having a whole school versus a single strand neighborhood or a single strand DLI. All of them are not as beneficial for the quality of the program. A stronger, thriving program has more than one strand. Okay.
Sorry, I was bringing that up in the chat. I agree with that, and totally, I think that's fine, but we don't ever talk about the displacement of putting whole school DLI. Those are displacing other schools, and that, if we want to get technical, they're also a lottery program. So, it just seems that when we come back to CSS, it's, about how we're screwing over a neighborhood and not by our own design. So it's getting frustrating on our end. But, the idea that it keeps coming up with us and not with whole school DLI stands out. Sorry.
Thanks, Josh.
Okay. I think it, okay. Are there any other hands up?
We've got a couple more hands up in about 3 or 4 minutes in this segment. So go ahead, Beth.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask if the delayed implementation of the changes for SCGC gives any room to then incorporate more schools. It's been a concern of mine that the inner Southeast schools that are the more overcrowded schools that are over 80% capacity in our region are not included in this process. And it makes me concerned about how are we going to make sure that we have robust enrollment across the region when the majority of the schools that are at the high end of the enrollment are not included. And so would that allow us to have a more extended balancing without re-impacting these current schools later?
So there's two things to consider here. Our board back in the spring gave us a charge. They asked us to minimize the process due to the pandemic and the impact on families. So they actually asked us not to make it a whole southeast across the whole, all the way from the river to the district eastern boundary. They asked us not to do that. They asked us to make it a smaller process. So that was part of their charge to us. And the second part is that we have significant severe overcrowding at two of our high schools, Grant and Franklin. And our board has made it clear that we need to do some work at our high school boundary levels, at our high school level boundaries. So that is that will be the next priority given to us by the board.
Related question to that one, Claire, is do we have more time period if we're delaying implementation, since we're kind of scrambling here on the current timeline and have lots of work still to do?
There is, because of the high school process needing to start right now, we have, there are no classrooms left at those two high schools, and we have literally made every nook and cranny into a classroom in those high schools. So we really need to provide some relief, and our board is asking us to move forward with that process as the next one. So that it doesn't allow for us to go farther out into the spring, because we will need to start a new process. And we simply don't have the capacity, either staff or board wise, to do both processes at once.
One more comment or one more hand up, and then we still have time to process this group. So after the large group discussion, we will go into our small group rooms to process this board feedback. So don't feel like it's the only opportunity to speak to that. But Micah, you did have your hand up, and I want to get to that before we go to the small group. Oh, your hand just went down. I don't know.
No,
okay,
I'll speak. I'll speak since you asked. My question is, if we push back this process to 2023 implementation, I have some families that are concerned, that are affected by the boundary change, and they just want to know how it's going to be, what's the transition going to be like now? Is that going to be the cart before the horse to consider that, or just say it's, this proposal, everyone's going at the same time? So I think parents just want to know that information, regardless of which proposal.
So those decisions haven't been made yet, and it's certainly a conversation that we can have with the board. It can be another area of a conversation with the board in December.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands up. Let's go ahead and continue this discussion. So we're going to go into our small group room, and we're going to talk about the conversations that were had at the board, kind of what we've been talking about today, and talk about kind of how does it affect where we are in the process, right? I still see a good amount of comments coming in, but we're hoping to take those to the small group rooms. And Marnie and or Nathan are going to push us in there, right?
Thank you, Chair DePass, for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you.
And Director Brim Edwards.
My pleasure.
You're welcome. Sorry, I'm not on video.
One. Okay, we're gonna keep going. And I believe our next item on the agenda is actually inviting, this is a new item. We have heard from many members of the Southeast Guiding Coalition about the desire to hear more directly from the co-chairs of this process. They are kind of a collecting point of input for the Southeast Guiding Coalition. And so this is a new part of the agenda. We will be having this in all of our meetings. And so wanted to allow Beth Kavanaugh and Adriel Person an opportunity to share with you what they're hearing from the rest of the Southeast Guiding Coalition.
Hi. Let's see. Oh, am I muted? Okay. I wanted to reintroduce myself, and I'm Beth Kavanaugh. I'm a Hosford parent, one of the co-chairs.
I'm Adriel Person. I am a Richmond parent. And the other co-chair.
So we asked for a little time. Oh, there, now I can see Adriel. It was like I had this weird screen for a minute. We wanted to have an opportunity to sort of liaise a little bit and share what we've been hearing from the community through this process, and also just invite you, as this is going to be, as we'll do this going forward, if there are things you'd like to be brought forward in the meetings that we can touch on in these reports, that please, and just for general questions, comments, feedback, thoughts, processing throughout, in between meetings, please reach out to Adriel and myself to touch base going forward if you haven't been doing so already. Do you want to jump in with some of the stuff we've been talking about so far?
So I think one of the opportunities that we realized earlier on is that there was a voice challenge, right? We needed to get more families of Native American and African American engaged, or at least give them some visibility. And so one of the things that I'm working on, that I'm sort of attacking with some of the CBOs that I either work with or I'm familiar with, is sharing some of this information and figuring out who the right contact is to get them to this table, so that we can increase in this moment at this time the voice and give you all a better perspective of how some of the other people are feeling about what's going on. We have some very strong voices here, and we want to make sure that that's equitable and that the information is shared. I apologize, it's so dark here. Sorry about that.
So a couple of the things that we've heard about in the last week. First of all, it's seeming like coalition members could benefit from more opportunities to process or debrief, brainstorm in a more unstructured way than what's built into our meetings. Because we're only meeting every other week, which is great in terms of not taking quite so much volunteer hours in our schedule. When we were hearing that from the community, we went to the staff to say, okay, what can be provided that can be accessible for SCGC members who feel like would benefit from some more opportunities to process. So that is something that we're going to talk about tonight, and give you all a chance to provide some feedback on what might work best for you in terms of if there are times that you would want to come log in to a Zoom meeting that's more unstructured and led, more sort of community led or SCGC membership led rather than an agenda. So that, I know that there's going to be a poll coming up, but we can go through the rest of our sort of talking point. Oh, here it is. We can do that right now. So, so if one of these, oh, let's see, can you answer more than one on the poll? I don't know. But so these are a few times we're floating for sort of a coffee talk, informal virtual meetings for processing in between meetings. And one option would be the Friday after, sort of a lunch hour meeting, or Thursdays on a non-meeting week, or immediately prior to our standing meetings on a Thursday. So I think you can just go ahead and answer that right now.
Yeah, so this will give us the opportunity to, one, open the space, right? There were some emails floating around about getting more communication and getting people together in a meaningful way. And we want to make sure that we give you all that space, but we make sure that everybody who would want to be involved in that is involved in it, either virtually via this opportunity or in some other format, if you can suggest one that works best. And we also want to make sure that everybody is aware that we know that Discord had presented some challenges in terms of feeling that information was being responded to in a timely manner. And I think you'll find specifically this week that you've seen more active engagement. We do want to make sure that you feel like that's a usable platform and a valuable one. And so you will get more information from our, not just the chairs, but from the people who are responsible for answering the questions for you. You'll be able to see much more, much quicker response, I guess is the right word I'm using, the right word to use.
So let's see. So that brings me to one thing I was hearing this week was with the board meeting that happened on Tuesday, SCGC members would love to hear from staff, sort of get those heads up on when those kinds of things are happening, and reminders about those meetings that are happening outside of our direct engagement. But you know, people want to see those board meetings. They want to hear what folks have to say about that stuff. And this time around, there was a committee member who sort of shared that reminder. But if that could be something that's coming through more official, like PPS is letting us know as members when this is coming to the board and when other kinds of things are being discussed outside of our committee meetings, because we're pretty committed to this, and a lot of folks really want to stay on top of all of those other opportunities as well. Let's see. The next one on my list, I think we kind of talked about earlier in the board presentation. There were concerns that the presentation to the board on Tuesday didn't fully express the questions and concerns that SCGC members had brought forth and missed some important context and background. So in some cases, it felt like board members' responses weren't really providing us with the guidance that we need at this point. Let's see, anything else you're hearing, Adriel, that I've missed?
I think Karina and the team did a great job, and Claire, of just touching base on the items that were at the forefront. So I think we're good.
Yeah. Oh, so one final thing was that we know there's community meetings going on in individual schools, and that there's a survey that's on the website, and wondering where or how do SCGC members access and process that feedback that's coming in from the community, so that we sort of have eyes and ears on what's going on in the individual schools, as well as just what we're hearing from our own communities. I think that's what I've got. Let's see. Oh, I see in the chat, Elizabeth asked if there's an opportunity to access a large space in addition to the Zoom, like maybe multiple platforms for some sort of in-person engagement, if I'm reading that right.
Yeah, I think we're still working with the district to ensure that, you know, with COVID requirements and restrictions of gathering specifically adults in the school, if that's a viable option. So they're looking and seeing what we can do about that. But it is a tricky time right now to invite adults into an already sort of precarious child situation.
All right, well, thank you all that already got your feedback into the poll. That's really helpful.
Yep, they're closing the poll as we speak, Beth. So we should get some results here in a minute.
Great.
Looks like Thursdays,
Yeah.
non-meeting week seems to be the dominant option.
But I think that's the end of the agenda time for us.
Thanks, guys. That was great. I like this new feature.
Yeah. We're calling it the co-chair corner. So we'll be sure that we get them into all of our meetings here. So yeah, I think we're Nathan, we're hearing some issues in the chat, Nathan, that there may be an issue with the live stream that they can hear, but they can't necessarily see. So I don't know. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for those keeping us all on our toes. Yes. Okay. We are good. I believe this would probably be, we tend to take a break about every hour in this session. So why don't we use this as an opportunity, because this is a good shift for us as we start to then process again the scenarios. So why don't we take we'll do how are we doing on time here? Why don't we do a 10-minute break, and we will see you all back here at 7:22. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you, Gail, for keeping us going. All right, welcome back, everyone. Marty, yep. Sharing. Oh, Claire's back.
Having a technical issue right now. Her computer froze.
Oh no. Okay. We'll give her a minute. Oh, let's see that.
Okay, I think I'm operational again. Thank you for your patience. Nothing like coming back to speak to the room and finding that your computer did not want to respond. So, are we ready for me to go ahead and get started?
We are.
Okay. So we would like to shift focus from programmatic issues to another important lever, the school boundaries, which are the basis of neighborhood schools. And for modeling strong neighborhood schools, we're using factors included in board policies. These are promoting walkability, student cohorts, moving together between levels, fitting well and building capacity, future enrollment projections, and who may be impacted by the changes using a racial equity and social justice lens. So in the slide, you see the link to the policy and the administrative director that helps guide the modeling for strong neighborhood schools. Okay. And with that, I turn that back over to Jenny. Or is it Karina? Excuse me.
Yeah, you're turning it over to me this time. Thank you, Claire. So we just wanted to take a moment. We have been mining the information, the feedback we've been getting in Discord specifically, and then in any conversations directly between the SCGC, the FAQs, questions that are being asked of the school district. To focus on, we've spent a good deal of time talking about sort of these program shifts, right? Whether it's CSS or DLI. And we want to, as we start to look at the impacts to specifically to scenario or proposals A and B, and then thinking about the drivers for C, what have we heard relative to neighborhood schools, right? Thinking specifically about that. And so what you see on this slide are kind of the main themes that came out of the impacts specifically to neighborhood schools. So the boundary changes, where the lines are drawn, right? That to ensure that boundaries make sense. Another clear thing that we heard was to avoid crossing major streets or dealing with major intersections, to ensure to the greatest extent possible that we have contiguous communities, that we're not creating islands, and that we are thinking about transportation impacts, right? So those are kind of the main themes that came out of that and some of the specific feedback that we received. So this is really where we want to kind of focus the conversation kind of moving forward. And Jenny from Flow is going to join us now to talk a little bit about what that process looks like for processing proposal C and for incorporating the input we've received so far. And then we will break up again into small groups to talk about the implications for that. Jenny?
Thanks, Karina. So I know that this is something that we've been looking at the entire time, and this isn't going to be anything new, but really just wanting to recenter ourselves on when we're thinking about the modeling and thinking about draft A and draft B and looking forward to draft C, just wanting to rethink about what really the board charges for the SCGC. And it is a recap, but it's not only applicable to draft proposal A and B, it's also applicable to draft proposal C, which is still in development, and appreciate that we're not rushing to just put something in front of you right now, because we've been having these important conversations over the past 2 weeks related to how can we maybe modify the guardrails that we've been working under and come up with something new based on the feedback from instructional leadership as well as the SEGC. So the board charge, what we're still always going to be focusing on as part of this process in any proposal we develop in collaboration with you all, is really looking at converting Harrison Park from a K-8 to a comprehensive middle school. That means that the K-5 students at Harrison Park do need to relocate to a new location, and also really wanting to increase enrollment at Lane Middle School. Go to the next slide, please. We've also had some programmatic guidelines from instructional leadership and with the SEGC feedback to support the board's charge and help guide us as well as the SEGC in developing these draft scenarios. So things that we're thinking about for proposal C, knowing that whole school K-5 DLI is preferred, and that is something that we've been able to look at in A and B. C, we're going to look at balanced but co-location of DLI programs as an option. And then we also want to think about maintaining no single strand neighborhood programs on co-located campuses. So really wanting to maintain a focus on neighborhood programs that are more than just single strand programs. Another thing that's come up is looking at avoiding multiple DLI programs at a single middle school. So that's something that we'll be looking to adopt in Model C. And then thinking about creative science, remaining in the Southeast, but also as a K-8, and looking at partner school sites that have initial spaces for both programs. And that did come up as a question earlier that I was able to capture, and we can talk about when we compare A, B, and C, what specific sites have capacity to maintain creative science as a K-8 as it is, as well as providing some additional supplemental info with CSS as a K-5 for reference. So being able to look at the K-5 cohort of the CSS program, as well as the 6 through 8 component of it. Next slide, please. Thank you. So tonight we really want to focus on something that we've heard a little bit from folks in the breakout rooms, and we have some good feedback, but these are things that really thinking about boundary changes as important, as Claire mentioned, levers to achieve these results, thinking about the guidelines and specifically EFG, where this is where boundary alignments can really help meet these programmatic guidelines. So thinking about preferred middle school enrollment above 500 students and 270 for elementary students. And then, oh, sorry, I'm seeing stuff on my screen. Also thinking about preferred classrooms with 80% of capacity in use. We had been thinking about not including modulars prior, but also potentially on the table is looking at new modulars that can also be included for increasing capacity at certain locations. So that's something in proposal C that we'll be able to bring into the mix. And then again, H, avoiding moving boundaries across major arterial streets where possible. And so really looking at you all for some guidance tonight, thinking about how we can not only incorporate this boundary changes into A and B, but also into proposal C. So I'm just going to encourage folks in the small groups, knowing that we're looking at boundary changes related to A and B that are maybe there because of certain program placements. And so looking at the maps and just thinking about getting information from you and feedback about where these boundaries could be, regardless of if we're looking at A or B, we can look at both. But if there's anything that you all know from your communities and your neighborhoods that we should be incorporating, we'd like to spend some time tonight really focusing on that, because we can incorporate that into A, B, and C that we're still developing. And that's it for me. Back to you, Karina.
Thank you, Jenny. I just did the same thing that I always talk to you about in terms of keeping myself muted. So yes, I believe, I think Claire is still having some connectivity issues. So I wanted to address an item, I believe, Marissa, that you put, yes, just one of the things that came up in the board meeting very clearly was that there are a couple of DLI programs that we talked about, or that the district talked about, sort of are a little bit different as it relates to single strand. One is the Russian program at Kelly, because there just aren't enough native Russian speakers to create multiple strands. I think there was a lot of conversation at the board level about sort of how to best serve those students, but currently that is single strand. And then the Mandarin DLI program at Harrison Park, because that is a rather nascent program, and so it's still adding students to that program. And so I think those were single strands that were, at least from the district level, considered a little bit different than some of the other DLI schools in neighborhood schools with DLI, with single strands. Go ahead. Sorry, Claire, you're back now.
No problem. I appreciate you filling in, because I'm obviously having a bad internet night. I'm sure all of you can relate. It happens to all of us. But it wasn't intended to create a decision. It was intended to give examples of why you might want to consider a single strand. Okay. And so just helping the board, because there were a few board members that were saying no single strands. And I don't think that's possible, just with what we currently have in place. But there are, certainly they want us to limit them and have fewer of them. And especially no neighborhood strands, single strands. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That answered the question.
I believe so. Okay, so now we are going to go into our small group breakout rooms. And just as a reminder, that the idea that we really want to focus on in terms of kind of what the boundary change implications are for neighborhood schools. This is a district policy that we wanted to highlight again, thinking about what are those factors for what we're calling optimal boundary changes, right? So a feeder pattern that allows as many students as possible to kind of stay in their cohort, to continue to move from one level, school level, to the next. Student body demographics, obviously, you know, both you as an SCGC and the board value diverse schools and trying to create those and maintain those as much as possible. Compact boundaries that promote safer routes to schools and a sense of community, as well as sort of address those natural and man-made, human-made barriers. And then also looking to create optimal use of existing facilities, right? Ensuring that we are trying to create boundaries that leverage where you have schools with greater capacity and address where you have schools with less capacity, so that we aren't inviting capacity issues in those schools in the future. That we want to create program and enrollment stability in surrounding schools. And last but not least, limit the impact of boundary changes to the smallest number possible. So that's kind of the goal. And so what we want to do as we break into our conversation about proposals A and B is to take a closer look at boundaries that are proposed in those proposals, and think about what example can you find of boundary changes that support those optimal boundary factors, and then others that don't. So as we try to kind of shift our focus to neighborhood schools, because we didn't spend an awful lot of time analyzing these two proposals relative to neighborhood schools, kind of keeping that in our context. So I believe, Marnie or Nate, you were going to push us into our breakout rooms. Thank you. Whew. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I know there's a lot to process. There's a lot of information. One of the suggestions that we had in our room was that seemed to help in phase one was to get paper maps and information out that some folks are having a hard time navigating kind of the dashboard and getting all of that content, you know, kind of in their hands at the same time. And so we'll take that back to the district and see if we can't get that out to you, because I know that was seen as really helpful in phase one. Marnie, will you share screen again? Because I believe it is now time for us to move to talking a little bit more about engagement in our conversation. All right, Ms. Shanice Clark.
Good evening, everybody. And we all know our series of opportunities where we really want to provide and focus on communities of color and students to hear feedback on has been delayed to December. So this is just a list of our dates, and you'll also find that on our website. There's a flyer listed there, and it's in all of our the 6 languages, and so that's available for folks to share and pass along as well. But here are a list of some of the opportunities, but we know there's a lot more, especially at those school sites where we're already hearing really rich feedback from families and students. On our next slide, I just wanted to be able to reflect on some of what came up at our last meeting in your small groups, especially as we talked a little bit about who we're not hearing from and who we're missing. And so this is the summary of what we heard from you all. And we really want to directly translate that into what we're prioritizing for our outreach in the series of engagement. And so you'll see targeted communities here, or school programs, or schools in each of those spaces, especially as we think about Bridger, Lane, CSS, Lewis, Woodstock, and the specific communities that were named, wanting to get those folks aware, especially the people of color that are residing in those communities. And want to also name a number of ways we're reaching folks in addition to what is listed here, a message to our greater community, but also having in multiple forms, text messages that are also translated to our families and students, as well as just sharing this information with folks who have already been engaged with us, and our community agents and ResJ partners that support our communities in the schools that are impacted by the process. But there's much more happening. Flyers are being sent out to schools in the next, starting tomorrow. And there's going to be a number of strategies that we employ to make sure families and students are hearing about this. And I did also want to name that there'll be an exclusive space for students. And something I want to talk to my colleagues about is how we can care for students during the open house as well. And so those are all things that we're going and pushing along here. On the next slide, we could just move on to just hear feedback from you all. We talked about who is missing, who we're not hearing from, and I want to provide additional space for anybody to share insight on how we reach these folks that we need to prioritize. I named some strategies, and we hope to work with our school communities and centrally to get the word out about these sessions in early December. But I want to just leave the floor to the group now to share any recommendations or suggestions on how we are reaching folks that we need to be hearing from in the process.
Yeah, Dee, I see your hand up.
Our feedback from our Latinx community was that just like meetings like this don't work, and it was phone calls was what we were requesting. So we started like a kind of like a phone tree where basically just calling like 5 or 10 people, and that seemed to be for our community it was just a super effective way to get feedback from our faces that don't come to these meetings or to like PTA or community meetings.
Thank you. That is great feedback. Are there any other communities that are seeing similar feedback from any particular? I know, Leah, that you talked a little bit about your Somali community being having difficulty with these sort of sessions.
Yeah, we did in person on site once and got a few parents that way too, and just outside because of vaccination, you know. So and it was cold and it worked though.
Okay. Are there any other either CBOs or other vehicles we can use to get the message out for these sessions, or to figure out alternative ways of reaching some of our targeted audiences that we haven't heard from?
I know that Marysville shared that she displayed her maps in front of her school and sees the opportunity during drop-off and dismissal at the end of the day to talk to parents about SDGC ideas, plans, and processes.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's great hearing what principals are doing. I think in addition to that, we want to hear, are there ways that the district can engage with larger folks to get people into some of these ideas and input conversations that are being scheduled for early to mid-December. Harmony, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think those things that we found successful is person-to-person contact, but also like paper flyers, right? Sometimes just these digital engagements, the website, emails, one where there's a barrage of those in general from in everyone's lives, but just we've been handing out, or folks at our school have been handing out paper flyers, and that also gives them option to like engage in the conversation about what's happening, because a lot of folks still don't know. I mean, we're trying to bridge that gap, but I think, you know, hard copy paper and real person-to-person contact is in many ways the only way to engage kind of the full community.
Sure. Yeah.
I have a, I'm going to jump into, this is Michelle. I have used the community engagement liaison services who can conduct a culturally specific outreach. So not just language group, but also cultural. And so when I'm trying to reach communities, I might hire community engagement liaison services to specifically reach out to 9 communities, but those 9 liaisons can get me information in 16 different languages and cultural groups. And I found that a really helpful way to reach people on concepts that, you know, and I think it helps to have someone that looks like you engage with you rather than having someone that doesn't look like you advocating.
For sure. Thank you, Chair Pass. I believe that's who that voice was. Carmen.
Hi, everybody. Good night. I think that kind of echoing what the last 2 people have said is just the importance of the one-on-one conversations and direct connections with families. I feel like at Lent specifically, because I'm from Lent, that's what's worked well. Kind of the school working together to identify the parents that kind of have a feel or connection with a lot of other parents, and receiving the information direct from other parents has always helped us when advocating during the times of change in our community, to have the paper flyers or just information that doesn't seem too overwhelming, because there's times that things that get made up by the district can be overwhelming for families. Something that is easily communicated would be the best option, at least in our community.
Thank you, Carmen. Eddie.
Yeah, I would just like to back up. Also, Carmen said in the paper flyers I've been working in our area, we've been doing that. It's been pretty successful. The other thing is, this is kind of random, but I also want to bring a little bit of the kind of sensitivity to emergent English speakers or non-native English speakers in how we label these. Like, I'll give you an example. When I understand that, PPS been saying that this is an iterative process, but when the proposals were announced, it had the words non-negotiable on it. And, a lot of things can get lost in translation. And among a lot of like non-English, especially Chinese speaking community families, when they read non-negotiable, they were just like, oh, this is a done deal. What's the point of engaging? Because, they already decided for us, and just kind of backed off. So I just want to just point that out as like maybe choice of words, and how we are just kind of being aware of that. A lot of the words that we put up there can be lost in translation, and kind of be careful about that. Yeah, thank you.
I want to echo that. And again, working with the community engagement liaison services, I hired them to explain to the cultural communities at temples and mosques what a housing bond was. And so like the direct word-to-word translation for bond might mean glue or a chain or a link in a chain, but actually it's a funding mechanism. So I found that technical translation culturally delivered was really effective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's true. I certainly know it's true in Spanish as well. Tanya.
I was thinking, since we have parent-teacher conferences coming up next week, and we have such trusted relationships and a lot of opportunity from, I'm thinking about our DLI families, and wondering if it's an appropriate format to be able to have teachers be a source of providing that outreach, because we know that we're going to see a lot of parents during those conference times. I also think that if families are making that outreach during virtual parent-teacher conferences, it would be incredibly helpful if all the links to those sessions were already ready, instead of having to send parents back to a website to navigate one more time to find those virtual resources. If we've got all of that information ready, that our trusted staff and faculty can get to families directly, especially those that might be most impacted by some of these moves, it would be a really important step.
Thank you, Principal Arnold. Harmony, I see your hand up. Do you have a new comment, or is that still up from the last time? Okay, answered your own question. Anyone else? Any other ideas? Any other input in terms of strategies to reach who we're trying to reach here? Okay. Trying to gauge where we are. We did want to talk a little bit about
Sheila has her hand up.
Oh, Sheila, I didn't see that. Sheila, yes. Oh, you're on mute, Sheila. Can't hear you.
I apologize. You can't really see the hand raised with my background.
It was totally faded into your background. Thank you.
I just wanted to request that as different school communities are able to communicate with community members, if there's any way that information can be shared, not just to PPS staff, but also to the Guiding Coalition as a whole. I know we already all have a lot on our plates, but it'd be great to be able to access that information directly as we have time.
Yeah. Christy.
Yeah, I just wanted to note something about the PAT date. It is on a staff meeting day. PAT members have staff meetings from 3:35 on Tuesdays. And that meeting is scheduled on a staff meeting day starting at 4:30. And almost all PAT members are in staff meetings till 5 o'clock on Tuesdays. And that Tuesday is listed in our calendar as a staff meeting day. Just to note on that Tuesday, that's a staff meeting day on our district.
Tuesday the 14th?
Yes.
Okay. So you're busy. I'm sorry, you are in sessions until 5 p.m. Is that right?
PAT members have staff meetings until 5 on Tuesdays, and that's a staff meeting day. So PAT members will be in staff meetings until 5.
Okay. So we can look at potentially shifting that time frame. Yeah.
And I guess just a question about why PFSP members are not included in that. I know just in speaking and hearing reactions and responses from a lot of our PFSP members who oftentimes happen to be people of color, their union protections are different. And oftentimes they don't travel with buildings. They stay with the building versus traveling. There's a lot more uncertainty there. So I guess I'm just wondering why there would be PAT and not PFSP opportunities specifically to talk about impacts.
Christy, thank you for mentioning that. I totally agree.
There's a question that's out about what is PFSP. So PFSP is one of the unions that we work with in PPS. It is the union, it's Portland Federation of, I think it's school professionals. But it is often, yes, the classified staff, what we call classified staff, which are front office, administrative supports, paraeducators, educational assistants, campus safety associates are in that grouping.
Yeah. Nutrition services also, yeah. Thank you. Anyone, so I'm assuming Shanice, you're capturing all of these comments, and we can adjust our engagement plan accordingly. Yep. I knew you would be as well, Marnie.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that you all share in these meetings are absolutely captured. I think a number of the suggestions we heard too are underway, and I think we are able to circle back with our teams to make these adjustments, and appreciate y'all sharing some insight and really good feedback.
Okay. I know that there is also, folks were talking about, I think maybe it was you, Sheila, that I'm misremembering, that wanted to get kind of information all in the same vein, and being sure that that was all ready. So we do have kind of tools and materials that we can share, kind of our parting gift. So we'll get to that in a minute, but we actually, I think we're sorry, I'm trying to keep track of two conversations happening at once, because we've made it through. Maybe Marnie just stop sharing for a moment. We can just get to some faces. We've made it through our slated agenda for the night, but we just wanted to kind of keep the conversation open to let you all kind of have more discussions around boundaries specifically. I know that there were some rooms where that conversation was still thriving, and we needed to kind of come back to this room. So wanted to kind of open it back up to see if there's anything else that we want to be able to talk about. Oh, I see a hand up. Eddie?
Yeah, this may not specifically deal, well, actually it does deal with boundaries. If we do decide to postpone the enactment of this until 2023, and I think I wasn't really happy with the response about why we're not looking at some of the inner Southeast schools, because, and the reason for that, I know that the board decided that it was supposed to be limited, trying to limit impact, etc. But I feel like if that becomes a later phase, then we risk having to put the outer Southeast schools into this again, and they have to change, possibly face changing schools again. And that again is another equity issue, because the inner Southeast schools tend to be more affluent. And so we have, thank you. We have two board members that are here, this is a question of is this something that we can ask the board to be like, hey, can we expand this? If we're going to postpone this enactment until 2023, can't we expand the scope of this? Because now we have a little bit more time. I mean, is that not a possibility at all?
Claire, I'm going to leave that one to you.
Sure. I just said currently there are no plans for a later phase for Southeast. This is to complete the work in the Southeast in the purview of the charge from the board. The next phase will be our high school, a district-wide boundary for high school because of the significant overcrowding at two of our high schools in the center of the city. So that can't be fixed without involving a lot of other high schools. So that's going to be a significantly large process that we'll need to start soon in order to have some changes in place for fall of 23.
Thank you, Claire. So I'm seeing some comments in the chat relative to some sharing back. There were good conversations that were had in the breakout rooms, specifically a conversation. I don't know who, Andy, Jake, I think you were in Columbia, if I'm not mistaken, Andy, but there were some good conversations in your room regarding process. And so maybe I believe Columbia is your room. No, Marnie.
It's my room.
Yeah.
I'm Columbia, but I think Andy was your room, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Well,
I believe Andy's referring to a lot of what we talked about is that it's hard to look at boundaries when the programs aren't set. And so that they would really love to have a really focused, concentrated time to be able to look at boundaries once some of the variables are pinned down. So want to get into this. We talked more broad. We talked about busy streets and the city supporting the busy streets. Why are there not crosswalks on some of these areas? Some people said their neighborhoods, it was more about the distance to the school than crossing a street, that if they could be close enough, they could, have guards and make their way across those busy streets. Whereas other people said these busy streets are very dangerous. So talking about this sort of broad ideas, really wondering about the jagged edges of things. Why do they jump around like that instead of having it be more, a radius around a point around the school? Wondering why a lot of those are the way they are. And then wanting to have a more specific conversation about every single one of those boundaries and schools once they know what's happening. So if an entire school is going to be moved, then that affects all the others. And I think that's what you mean by process, Andy, that you would like to first have variables pinned before we talk about specifics.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just me. I mean, I'd love, Sarah or Maya or someone else, or Sheila. I think we all kind of coalesced. Yes. But yeah, basically the idea, like if we could say like by X date, even if there's still disagreements, the programmatic stuff is locked, right? And then that would give us the time we need both on the coalition and the community to try to get people to focus specifically on these boundary things. Because I think what the conversation revealed is there's tons of conversation to be had about this, and it's important, right? It's just really hard it's hard to focus on that and the programmatic stuff at the same time, I think, and I'm sure it is for community members as well.
Thanks, Andy. Or maybe Elisa, you'll give us a share back of what kind of the major themes from your room. Either you, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Similar to Clackamas. I think Marie, that was just right. Clackamas. These names are, yes. But we also talked about just the idea of understanding the history of some of these boundaries and why we can't just go out in a circle from some of these sites. There's talk about, it'd be nice to have the goal that every student who lives within half a mile of school could attend that school. But then, also hearing that, for example, Lane Middle School is on the edge of its boundary, and that there are students who live actually very close to Lane that in these scenarios would not be able to attend that school. And then talked about, so Dee had shared that she and a family member had actually gone out and they drove these boundaries just to see what they would, some of them would look like, in real life. And it seemed to her that there were some carve outs that in some cases looked like they maybe had socioeconomic implications, right? And wondered about that. And we talked about, let's see, the need, is there the need to honor the past of, certain boundaries, and also, the goal of minimizing disruptions to students, where there has been that history. But then at the same time, it's an opportunity, right, to do something that would work better but there's disruption there. There's a tension there. And then there's the point too that and Dee, I think, had mentioned this, that a lot of times when we think about diversity, it is white people wanting to see more BIPOC people in a school and calling that diversity, and that there isn't a community building component along with that. And so that it has to be more than just a simple matter of the percentage, right? Like there needs to be a community building element to make sure that there really is, that it really is successful. Yeah, I think those are the main things. Anyone else want to chime in? Okay.
Okay. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about what we heard in Clackamas, and Kathleen, let me know if I missed anything. I think one of the biggest things that we heard was just concerns about kind of, I'm going to call it the implications of COVID, right? So in terms of the numbers of families that will leave their neighborhood schools, either for special programs and or just in general, you know, to kind of deal with, I think it was called the gerrymandering of some of these kind of odd non-contiguous pieces of just to get enrollment numbers where they were, and sort of the volatility of kind of where we are in terms of COVID enrollment. You know, could some families come back? There was a lot of conversation about, now that vaccines are out for younger kids, that at the elementary level, they're starting to see some of that, or at least people talking about that. So that was something that, you know, Jed was trying to process in terms of what those impacts would be, and how those drivers would then impact some of those sort of a little bit more quirky boundary lines. We talked about, that it really is hard to get a good grasp of building capacity, and sort of looking at where we are, percentage of utilization and percentage of capacity. And there was a struggle with trying to align the data and the racial equity impact measures with kind of some of the drivers, right? I think Jed said, well, the drivers are what tell us if a tweak to a scheme is even achievable. It's a go or no go, whereas the metrics are the pieces that you can measure on the dashboard. I think those are the big pieces that I have. Is there anything major that I'm missing, Kathleen?
No, I think you captured everything.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? Let me see if I have any hands up. I don't see any more hands. Yeah, we've got lots of questions in the chat. I know that there's a lot of questions in the chat about whether, you know, kind of the extent to which the Southeast is being impacted, inner Southeast versus outer Southeast. And Claire, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's my understanding that from what I'm seeing is that, and what I heard from you earlier, Claire, that was a board direction. And so partly we've got to go back to the board if that's going to change, if at all. But that, I believe, is not something that's in the purview of staff and certainly Flow as they're running their numbers. Is that right, Claire?
Yeah, so last spring, when the board discussed the charge for phase 2, they really asked us to limit the impact on the number of schools. And so we've done that they focused their charge on really 2 comprehensive middle schools. And then that impacts, of course, other components, feeder patterns and programs tied to those schools, and as well as the separation of the K-5 on Harrison Park and having a home for them. And they're
Claire.
So
Claire, if I could just speak
Yes.
to that, because I think that was also paired with the understanding that the timeline was going to be implementation this spring. At least that was my understanding, with a very clear commitment to open Harrison Park as a middle school on that timeline. So to me, it's like it's an open question, or it's a different question about if the implementation is going to be moved back a year, whether it's still the same charge. And I guess the other thing I'd say is on the high school piece, I actually think it's a much bigger conversation, because to me, the biggest inequity is not necessarily the overcrowding at Franklin and Grant, although those are certainly issues that need to be addressed, but the artificial boundary of Jefferson High School, the fact that it has no neighborhood boundary. So I think to me, we're in just a different, we're having a different discussion than, do you think, is this the charge, and is it going to be done this spring? Which is, to me, that was a very clear, discrete commitment following phase one. So the first I processed, like, that staff might be saying it couldn't be implemented, was just in the briefing before the board meeting and at the board meeting discussion. So I just want to provide that as just one board member's perspective about the timeline and the scope.
Sure. And Julia, I completely agree with you on Jefferson High School and the importance of, we have a Center for Black Student Excellence process is beginning this year that will include, we're modernizing Jefferson High School, and the need for the conversation about a neighborhood boundary for Jefferson is certainly part of the district-wide high school boundary, but also really talking about the Albina community and the Center for Black Student Excellence all across the Northeast region is also high on the list for the incorporating that work into that next boundary process as well. So while last spring we did believe we would be able to finish this in time for fall of 22, staffing shortages across the country and the pandemic have had an impact on what is possible in order to have schools open in the fall with being fully staffed. So there are certainly changes that have occurred since the conversation last spring, and certainly we can bring this back to the board, but the latest conversations I've had with board leadership and board members asking for the high school process to be the priority at this point in time, especially tied to the modernization of Jefferson and the establishment of the Center for Black Student Excellence in the Northeast.
From my perspective, I feel the district made a commitment to those school communities who patiently waited this year to open a middle school. And I can just see the people at Creston now thinking, like, so good, glad we got into it, because exactly what we thought, which was that it wasn't going to happen right away. So I guess I want to just hold that, for at least for me, the thought that as of last week, I still thought that that was the intended goal of the phase 2 project.
And I want to weigh in about Jefferson too, because that's my neighborhood high school, and it's a school I attended part-time in the 70s, and you had to live in the district. And there is a Center for Black Student Excellence, and that community's been underserved for decades. I've been out of school for decades, and I live within walking distance. And I had the impacts of gentrification in this neighborhood in Albina are really evident in this school. And I also remember busing when kids in my neighborhood, my family, in some cases, busing to wider, more affluent schools. So we have a school that's underserved. And it has to, we have to think about it in the context of a larger system and systemic and racial, myths, and hopefully not perpetuate those myths. Albina is not a black, it's not a black area anymore, y'all. It's it's been gentrified. The diversity numbers are, the numbers of black students are higher in that building, but in the area, not so much, nothing like the Pinnacle in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I just want to say that I would be open to, exploring from a systemic issue, what are we actually talking about? Are we avoiding a discussion about, desegregating? And Portland has a very, not a great history with desegregation conversation. And so, Jefferson needs to be considered, and we need to talk about boundaries, and we need to talk about also figuring out what to do with our over-enrolled schools at Grant and Franklin. I don't know if this process is the exact right time to do that, but it's something that I'm acutely and viscerally aware of as someone that lives in this neighborhood that could choose to send my kids pretty much anywhere else but Jefferson. I'm signaling that it's of concern to me, the entire conversation. I don't want to lean on the Center for Black Student Excellence as an end all be all. I think it begs a larger conversation about who we are as a community and what our end goals are.
Thanks, Chair DePass, and thanks, Julia. I think there certainly has been a lot of conversation tonight, both in the chat and out loud, around kind of wanting to have confirmation board, like full board confirmation about kind of the scope of the Southeast Guiding Coalition's work, specifically as it relates, that's the word I'm looking for, as it relates to the ResJ goals and our racial equity impact measures. So we hear that, we'll carry that back to process forward. But we do want to close tonight by letting Dr. O talk a little bit about kind of what some of the next steps are and what some of the documents and data is out there to help you all start to process these in your respective neighborhoods. So thank you, Marnie. She's always a step ahead of me. Dr. O?
Thank you very much, Karina. Awesome job, great facilitation. Truly appreciate all the work that you put in tonight. I also do want to say that the conversations tonight have been incredibly rich. Most of it you have summarized, but we heard a lot from the different rooms about wanting the Southeast Guiding Coalition to consider adding schools. We also heard a lot about busy streets and wonky boundaries, for lack of a better way to describe them. We also heard a few people talk about the short-term boundaries that may not necessarily be of use down the road, just because those students may not be there. And we heard a lot about information also that is shared. So overall, tonight was very, very rich, incredibly informative, very detailed around the discussions and the true needs of our schools and the communities. And for that reason, I do want to say thank you all so much for engaging. We hope that many of your questions were addressed. The questions that weren't addressed will be addressed in the near future. We collect data in all these meetings. We revisit the data and we address a lot of the needs. We also thank you so much for engaging in very challenging and extremely difficult conversations and ensuring that everybody's voice is represented. Again, our listening sessions for our communities will start on the 6th of December. Flyers will be distributed starting tomorrow. Some of them have already been posted on our website. The community engagement team will also provide opportunities to hear from students. We want to thank our school leaders for their ongoing participation in recruiting and ensuring they provide space for our community members who would not necessarily sign up into SCGC, but who also have a voice. Please continue to share that information, continue to have them participate, and please continue to reach out to district leadership for support as is needed. Our next Remember also to please complete our feedback form before you leave. The information and input you give us on that feedback form is invaluable to us. We use it to design upcoming meetings, and we use it to also guide the things that we're going to prioritize in our upcoming meetings. Our next meeting will hold on December 2nd. We kindly request that you participate in the community listening events and that are scheduled to begin on December 6th. And please invite community members. On this slide, you will notice also that there are links here to data and more information that could be of help to you. I am going to call on Judy to please provide more elaborate explanations about what's in the data and how you can better utilize the data.
Thank you. So as you head into the Thanksgiving week, just a little thanks for all your hard work. Here's some data about dual language immersion students. It was organized as a response to a records request. But if you open these links that start with the questions, and then you'll see the answers underneath that. We know that there are many other questions that you have, and we are working to pull data together for you. Oh, Megan, I don't know if we got that link live. There you go. Megan's putting it in the chat. Thanks for all your questions, your queries, and we'll move new data out to you as soon as we can. Thanks, everybody. Dr. O?
Oh, thank you so much, Judy. So again, our next meeting will be on the 2nd of December. We do have community listening sessions that begin on the 6th of December. And our next upcoming board meeting will be on the 14th of December. In the interim, please continue to review the materials you have, continue to reach out to as many community members as you possibly can, and we'll do our best to be at the schools and communities to support everyone. Again, thank you so much for your participation tonight. Happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays to all. Drive safe, and we will see you on the 2nd of December. Meeting adjourned. Have a great night.